so you can kind of see the importance of the direction. That's more for, or I guess most V8 engines, but there's more space on one side of the bearing shell, like here, and that's because of the radius on the actual crank journal, so that it doesn't touch the corner. That's why it matters.
We got the crankshaft.
We have made a crucial error. So do you guys remember 2 videos ago when I said, oh yeah, I'm just gonna throw the rods in here because they're symmetrical and you know, I want all the letters of TSP facing the front of the engine. It's marked TSP, however, these are completely symmetrical all the way around. There is no dimple to mark which way it's supposed to go. With the connecting rod set in there, I have it where if you were looking at the motor head on, TSP would read correctly. Now, I paused the video because I want to see if you picked up on something specific I said. Something like, if you look at the motor head on,
TSP would read correctly.
And this becomes a crucial piece of information, as you'll find out later in the video. So there I was watching the latest video from Big Time where they're building their box body again. As they're putting all the connecting rods back together in their motor, he was talking about the chamfers on the rods themselves and how they go on the crank. And he was explaining that a larger chamfer goes towards the crank side, while the no chamfer side is where the 2 pistons are supposed to meet up. That's why it's important on a V8 engine. All about oiling and everything else. All of my chamfers are faced the same way. I know all the big chamfers are on the TSP side. So that means there's 4 large chamfers butted up against the piston side in my motor right now. Bad news. So I started panic searching online, trying to figure out how bad did I mess up. Well, after tons of panic searching and, you know, about an hour to 4 hours of searching online, I have finally come to the conclusion of what I have to do. With that being said, here's my theory. Option 1 is I can dismantle everything in the motor. And that means taking the heads back off and pulling everything back out and then resetting everything. Option 2 is that the pistons are symmetrical. Since the rings are already set in there, my idea is that the rings are tight in there and they should not spin. If I take off the oil pan, lift the motor up a little bit, take off those 4 rod caps that are my problem children, and spin them 180 degrees, then yes, the piston will spin 180 degrees. Hopefully the rings stay in place. This is a gamble. And then slide it back down and reattach the rod caps. So on our bad news and good news meter, good news is I don't have to take everything apart. Bad news is I still have to take out the motor mounts, lift the motor up, and then take off the oil pan, take off the windage tray, take off the oil pickup tube, and then remove 4 connecting rods, reattach them in a 180 degree fashion. Now the unfortunate thing of this is that I have to take the entire intake back off, so that way I can take the valley cover plate off, so that way I can lift the motor back up, which is not really what I wanted to do, but this is much better than having to take everything back apart. I can just lift the motor up, take the oil pan off, and hopefully I can just get to those 4 rods, which would be super convenient. Now, the fortunate part about this unfortunate circumstance is that I caught the problem. There's a good possibility that I could have blown this motor up, you know, a few miles into the drive, especially if my clearances weren't right. You know, oil's not getting to the proper places, especially during those break-in periods where things are really, really tight. It was a learning opportunity. I learned something. And at the end of the day, it really isn't that bad. It's just going to take me some more time to get everything undone and then put back together. So really, what did I lose here? And if we're really talking about pros and cons here, well, I now have an opportunity to try out the new light that my wife ended up buying me for super cheap at Aldi. So this thing's legit and puts out a ton of light. So at least I'll be able to see what I'm doing with all this. I should also note that because I have to do this, I will also have to replace the oil pan gasket, which not a really big deal in the grand scheme of things. And I had an extra one in the kit that I got for this oil pan in the first place. So not a huge deal. It'll take a little bit of time, but we'll time lapse the rest of this. And once I get it off, then I'll kind of show you what I'm working with. Greetings. It's about a half hour later, and I have pulled apart the windage tray, the oil pan, the oil pickup tube. I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is, based on the space in here, I will not be able to spin the rods 180 degrees, and I will have to take off the heads and everything else up top in order to spin it. The good news is that I don't have to do any of that because I did it right. So looking up in here, right, I had a moment of panic because I thought that I had faced all the TSP words faced forward, when in reality, I had actually faced them all upright. So that way, if you were looking at the motor,
TSP would read correctly.
so you can see TSP, and if we went to the other side, there is no TSP. So that means it's faced this way. Now I do know that all the big chamfers are sitting on the side that says TSP. So that means that all the big chamfers are on the crank side and that this is actually the correct orientation. Now, I'm not sure what possessed me to think that I had faced all the TSP letters facing forward correctly. But I'm pretty sure at some point I talked about just having them faced upright whenever you were looking at the motor, which would mean that I did all these pistons the same exact way when I was building them. And then when I set them in the motor, obviously left bank versus right bank, they would be flipped. So that way the letters TSP were faced upright when you would look at the motor, whether that be from the front or the back. So this actually is the correct way, and all I got to do is put everything back together. All right, so it's many hours later now. It's 1 a.m., but let me show you what we got going on here. So I buttoned everything up. I've got the motor mounts installed again. I've got the intake on there, and we even did a couple more things. So I'm out of the catch can. It's in the path of all the AC components, but you can see the box sitting over there. I'm not gonna be running AC right now. And then I also got the fuel pressure regulator mounted up. I was trying to debate on where that was gonna go, and I figured this was the best spot. So I've got the feed in, I've got the return spot right there, and then I've got the feed out to the fuel rails, and then everything should be good to go. So I will actually make those AN lines here next, and then we'll move on to some other fun parts. One of the important things whenever you're setting up these AN lines is figuring out which fittings you're going to run and where, especially whenever you have a new platform or something you haven't worked on. Trying to figure out where you're going to run all of your AN lines is kind of tricky. So what I did was I actually set up my catch can first, and then I set up the fuel pressure regulator. So I got to figure out what kind of space I was working with. Because I'm going to run a vented catch can, that means that it is not going to be a closed loop system. So both of these will be pushed to each one of the valve covers. This one is going to run up and along the back and feed into this fitting here. And then this one is going to be pointed and it's going to come over here. Now, I'm not going to be running an oil cap. I'm going to be running a adapter cap. The adapter that I'm going to be running has a -10 AN fitting and an LS style bottom adapter that threads into here, and then you just plumb your line up to it. It'll be going over the headers. I am going to be wrapping the headers, so I shouldn't have to worry about heat management too much. And then all of my fuel lines and everything will run back there. So I'll be the first one to tell you there is a right and a wrong way to do these lines. The way that I'm about to do it is not the correct way. But if you don't have the money or don't want to go spend the money on an AN wrench, adapter plates for your vise, then this is the way that you'll do it. Now, I actually have a file that I can 3D print that'll hold these AN lines a little better, and they'll be soft plastic, and I won't have to worry about marring up these surfaces. But for the sake of, showing you how to do it on a budget, I will show you how to do one line like this, and then I will actually complete the rest of the lines the other way. So what you do is you want to make sure you get a straight cut, and you'll have something like this. You'll see that it's not seated down all the way. Now, all you got to do is grab yourself a rubber mallet and hold the end of it and smack it down until it's flat. Now, if you take a look at that, you can see that the line is all the way down there now. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and I'm gonna grab a paper towel. I'm just gonna fold it over twice. And then I'm going to wrap this end in the paper towel. And now that I've got this end in there, I'm going to slowly press it into the vise, and then I'm going to clamp it down. Now you don't want to use too much force, that way you don't crack the fitting or anything like that. I'm gonna verify my line is still all the way pressed up against there. And now I've got the other end of it, and all I'm gonna do is just press this in and get it onto a couple of threads. And now once I've got it onto a couple of threads, I can go ahead and grab my crescent wrench that's wrapped in some painter's tape. It should help prevent from marring up the surfaces. So even with having stuff wrapped up the way I did, obviously it's not a guarantee, but at the same time, I'm not really concerned with the look of them. I didn't pay a whole ton for these fittings, as I had described in another video. And at the end of the day, if I'm at the racetrack or I'm somewhere in a pinch, probably not just gonna have the AN wrench readily available, and I'm gonna have to use a crescent wrench. So, you know, it'll be good for the first couple times that I gotta, you know, take it apart, but after that, it's kind of up in the wind. All right, so I've got my line tightened down over here, and I've got it run along the way that I want to take it. So I'll take the slack out that I want. I'll maybe give it just a little bit of slack, and then I'm going to bring it up to here, and I'm going to use this line right here as a rough measurement. I may take it back just a little bit, so that way when it's actually knocked in there properly, this is how it should sit. So I'll take a piece of green painter's tape, and I'll either take a saw or an angle grinder if you have one, and you're just gonna make that cut. You're just gonna repeat the same process for this fitting as we did for that one over there. All right, so we got this line set up. We got it running over to the valve cover on that side. And now we can run this line from here over here. Now, usually what I'd like to do is actually have this fitting installed, or whatever fitting I'm gonna be using installed on there, so I can see just how much line I need. But I know that the adapter that I got should set it pretty close to where, if I was just holding it right here, that should be the actual measurement. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make that line, and then we're also gonna make this line back here for the fuel pressure regulator to the fuel rail. But we're gonna take a break from that, and we're gonna move to the backside for an impulse purchase. So I went on Facebook Marketplace, and I found this AMD rear spoiler for a 67 to 69 Camaro that a guy was selling for $75. And usually these are about $175 alone without shipping and tax. So this was a really good steal. Figured I had the money, why not do it? So here we've got the template that's cut out already, because I was showing my wife how to cut out the first template, and she's gonna cut out the second template. So then we're gonna use the template, and we're going to drill out all of the holes, and then we're going to install the rear spoiler. Cut along that bottom edge, and then I cut along the top edge here, and then the entire dotted line is where I cut along. And then just go down, and then you're going to be cutting along this line.
The top line.
The top line.
Oh, I went too high up there.
That's all right. Since the driver's side is the one that's going to go over there,
Okay.
I'm going to take this passenger side first. I'm going to need your help. And you're going to take this, which is called a center punch. We're going to find the center of the hole. You take a smaller drill bit, line it up on that little
So
hole.
whatever the measurement was?
This is not the measurement. There you go. Look at that. So fast forward a couple days and we have the spoiler on. I was just spraying some of the paint on there to see how well some of that primer was going to adhere to it. But we are all lined up all the way down. Everything fits really, really well. I still have to adjust the trunk just a little bit, so that way this sits a little more flush. Same thing with the other side, but you can see that this is crushed in just a little bit. So we'll pull this up eventually. But the spoiler is on, so that means we can move back to the front of the car. We've gone ahead and we've made all the lines necessary, including fuel and for the catch can. Now the other thing is getting everything else bolted up so that way we can start putting the fenders on. So in order to do that, we had to connect our power steering lines back up, but this is an older style GM fitting that goes on here, and this is a new Type 2 pump that comes on LS motors. And instead of creating a brand new line or getting a custom gearbox or a custom pump that would fit, I went on Amazon and I actually found a Type 2 to an inverted flare fitting that will thread into my Type 2 pump and be able to connect up to the power steering line over there. I've also removed the headers so that way it's a little bit easier to reach in there. And then I've also got the fitting for the clutch master cylinder and then run the line there. So these two things were really like the last components that I needed to get installed before I could start throwing the fender liners on and getting everything situated so I can figure out where I can run my fuel lines and whatnot. I also had to figure out what I was going to do for the oil feed because the CX Racing Kit comes with this billet adapter that has the feed ports on it. However, the adapter that they gave me did not thread in properly. So instead I have the filter mounted how it normally would. And then I went ahead and bought an ICT billet dual turbo feed block, which has both of the NPT ports up on the top, and I can run it like that. I also went ahead and bought a few other parts, including the fuel tank return fitting, the 90 supply fitting, and then I also got some header bolts. And you can see that these are made in China. They are labeled chromoly header bolts. They're only about 20 bucks on Amazon. And then I looked at it a little bit closer, and these are all marked ARP. They do come with a 12-point head on it, and they come with all of the necessary nuts to put it on there. So extremely happy that I didn't have to pay the ARP tax. We'll actually see if these are true ARP or if they hold up, but I think for 20 bucks, it's not a bad deal. So before I throw the headers on, I also did buy exhaust wrap. So the exhaust headers will be wrapped all the way up, and then I'm also probably going to buy some more wraps so that way I can do the downpipes, so that way nothing gets melted in there. But before we do any of the exhaust stuff, I'm going to go ahead and get this power steering line fit on and get everything else buttoned up. All right, so we got the fitting and the line installed, and we've got it run over here. Same thing with the return line. And I also mocked up my proportioning valve up under the distribution block. I will have to get another line that runs from the distribution block down to the proportioning valve, but I think I like that fitment overall. I think everything looks super neat up in here, and that about wraps it up. In the next episode, I'm going to get everything bolted up front and start installing the fenders on again. I'm also going to go wrap the headers and get them installed with the exhaust gaskets. And then we're going to be working on the next piece of it, which is going to be dropping the fuel tank. And we're actually going to take out the rear end as well. And that's because I bought this. So the big surprise is this Ford 9-inch rear end. I picked this up off a marketplace. So the same dude that I bought the LS swap headers from actually had this in his car, and I'll insert a picture here from when I went out to buy those headers and actually saw that he had this rear end. He told me, hey, I'll be taking it out in the winter. You can buy it if you want. So after hunting around on Marketplace, I kind of figured that an expensive rear end wasn't going to be in the budget. So I picked this one up for a good deal. It's got a billet rear yoke and 31 spline axles. I'll have to do a little bit of modification to the end to fit my brakes, but these do have the 1/2-inch studs. I already bought new studs to go all the way around the housing. Everything looks super clean on this, and I will go ahead and get this installed into the car, and we'll also be modifying the brakes to get them to fit properly, but that'll be for the next episode. I've got a lot of work to do. I've got to re-weld all the spring perches up on there, and I have to get this fit into the car properly. But this is already cut down to the proper length, and all the parts are readily available just in case something goes wrong. That'll be in the next video, along with dropping the fuel tank, and we might actually be able to get some of the fittings installed onto the fuel tank and get those fuel lines run up to the front. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.
This is a Bang Music exclusive.